Welcome to today's weekly wisdom webinar series. Thank you so much for joining. I do hope all is very well. An acknowledgement, please, for the traditional landowners of this land and, of course, all Indigenous people of all lands around the world, their innate wisdom, their contributions to society, and, of course, their presence and their ongoing wisdom. Wow, what an exciting series, subject matter we have today. We are speaking to the tenet of connected minds as part of the sovereign leadership model. People, this is an exciting area to discuss, and there are so many reasons as to why this is the case. Now, we're going to gain some clarity on what connected minds means. We're speaking to the three brain states. Now, we're not referring to the reptilian brain or the R-complex brain, the limbic systems and the prefrontal cortex. They're the three major areas of the cognitive brain. We're going to be speaking to today the three brain states, what I call the three brain states, or the three connected minds of the human body. Excuse me, we have the cognitive brain, which is obviously here. We have the heart brain, which is here in our chest, and the enteric or the gut brain, which is in our digestive system. I'm trying to get up our pie so you can see the digestive system. Now, there is a necessity for us as human beings to fully embrace and fully understand the power of having a connected three brain state and what that means. Firstly, I'm going to throw something out there that is really important. I'm going to touch on this in a moment as well. There is so much that we don't know. The science is just starting to understand this, and we'll speak a little bit to some of the ancient traditions and the ancient wisdom traditions and what they say about integrating that balance of the three brain states. But in addition to what I just mentioned, then with respect to science, I'm just going to adjust this microphone one moment, please, people. Got it. With respect to what science knows, we do understand that information travels upwards. So from the gut, from the heart to the brain. The brain interprets that into language and into thoughts that we understand. And we understand that it's a super highway of neural activity that takes place in these areas. It's phenomenal. It's very exciting to understand this. It's to really begin to understand what this means for us and our progress and where we're going as a humanity. It's incredible. We also understand that the vagus nerve is responsible for at least 70 to 80% of this communication. But it begs the question, where is the remainder of the communication placed? How's it being transmuted, transported, understood, interpreted? So many questions we don't understand and we don't know as a collective, as a even in scientific groups, but as individuals. It's a very exciting time because this area and even the vagus nerve and understanding the vagus nerve and its primary function and what it's really responsible for, in addition to understanding pain centers around the body as well, but just the communication. This is a very exciting time that we're at with respect to understanding the three brain states and the way we maneuver and integrate them. Now, I've got a lot to speak to tonight. A decent amount of research has gone into this, and every week, of course, but a great deal today. I don't know if we're going to have time for questions. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to push through, but it's exciting. So it's very exciting what we're going to speak to. So when we begin to use all three brain centers, we naturally and effortlessly increase our intuitive abilities, our intuitive capabilities, and generally we engage in wiser, more connected and more coherent decision making for self and for those that are involved in our lives. That's very important to understand. The reason being is because we're able to absorb, understand, process and execute more information from our environment. We're able to interpret it cleanly. We're able to interpret it cleanly for what it is and then express that more accurately. So it's a very, very interesting space to be in. Now, I will be speaking to neuroscience a great deal in this session. I know in previous sessions and um, in previous webinar series, subject matter topics that we've spoken to, I definitely integrate a great deal of ancient traditional wisdom, Eastern mysticism and Eastern philosophy in particular. There is a little bit of that today, but I've taken a slant of looking at neuroscience just to help us understand what is happening today in modern science and to help us understand what is happening today in a prevalent methodology used to really determine and distinguish our realities, and that is the scientific method. So and neuroscience is a natural part of that, but so is studies into the human biome, and obviously which is the enteric system and the digestive system, the gut brain. Also studies into the electromagnetism that is emitted from the heart. So just really biology, looking at biology, human biology, and how that's integrating with neurobiology as well, and immunology, and a series of other disciplines within Western science and within Western medicine as well. But I will speak to Eastern philosophy today, most definitely. So recent neuroscience studies and findings show that we have very complex and very functional neural networks or brains in our heart and in our guts, in the enteric system. So we're actually beginning to understand there's a huge difference now between us thinking that all the neural activity was here in the brain, in the head, as opposed to now that being distributed widely throughout the body. But of course, not everywhere in the body, but these three main centers in the body. Combining these neuroscience findings with behavioral modeling research, which is very important because we're starting to look at the psychology of self and the psycho-emotional aspect of self and how we interrelate and interact with ourselves, but also with each other. We can begin to comprehend a number of key insights pertaining to the roles of the cognitive, heart, and gut brains for the sovereign leader. So I'm always going to bring this back to the sovereign leader, guys. I'm always going to help us understand why is this important to the leader of self, the governor of self, especially in an efficient and effective manner. Because those that can tap into and that can harness the full intuitive and innate intelligence of their multiple brains, the heart, the head, the gut, in alignment together, are at a distinct advantage as a human being. Now, I want to make some connections here and just go further. If you are that person that is highly integrated and highly connected as a human being, you're not only going to be of value to yourself and to the evolution of self, you're going to be of tremendous value to others. You're going to be of tremendous value to those in your life. There's going to be a domino follow-on effect of that. In other words, you are of service to your community and to those in your life. And that, my friends, is a posture of selfish selflessness, which of course is an integral part of the sovereign leadership model, specifically sitting under the tenet of being of service. So we understand that when we achieve and reach and experience this alignment in the three brain states, we become better human beings, to put it very, very simply. Understanding these three brain states provides us with practical methods for aligning and integrating our head, heart, and gut brains for increased levels of emergent wisdom. Very, very important to understand this. Emergent wisdom in our movement through life and for developing an expanded core identity as an authentic leader. So in other words, the more aligned we get in these three brain states, the more of an experienced sovereign leader will become. And we're able to move with greater intent and attention to being a sovereign leader, acting from that space. Very important to understand that, yeah? So we're looking at the why now, and let's look at the why behind the integration. Why integrate? What's the point? Why not just listen to our heads? Well, I've explained slightly already why, but we're going to go into a little bit deeper. The main reasons being is because when we integrate, we are experiencing peak states of being. Now, to me, as a human being, when we say, what's the purpose of life? It's to maximize our potential. And we can do that through peak states of being, through experiential peak states of being. Now, we spoke to this last week in self-actualization, in the tenet of self-actualization, and in the tenet of self-realization, where peak states of being, where we're fully expressing our potential, is really the ideal of existence. It's one of the main reasons why we are alive, why we exist. Think about that for a moment. Sit with that. Feel into that. Why would we want to be anything less than what we can be? That's an interesting point to think about. It's a very interesting point to contemplate. And it's a powerful question to ask ourselves. Because remember, the quality of the questions we ask ourselves in life determine the quality of the life that we live. Why are we calling these brains? That's another question. Because as far as modern science is understood in Western medicine, this is the only brain that we've got. It's here. It's here. Why are we calling these brains? There needs to be a technical definition to what makes a brain a brain. And this is where it gets interesting. This is where it gets very interesting and intriguing. Our knee, our elbow, it's not a brain. Our forearm, it's not a brain. Our fingers are not brains. Our liver is not a brain, as far as we know. But there are lots of good reasons why science can actually show that the head, the heart, and the gut are brains. This is where it gets very, very interesting. They each have their own intrinsic nervous systems, number one. They have neurons, number two. They've got the whole range of capabilities in order to do complex adaptive processes. They can take on information, process it, store it, change it, and adapt it. Interesting. It's amazing what the enteric and the heart brain can do. Basically, if it can learn, it's a brain. The heart and the enteric system can learn. So through behavioral modeling, again, we can discover how this applies to life. Lo and behold, these different brains do different things. So we're going to go through the prime functions now, the prime functions of each brain center. We'll start with the heart. We'll start with the heart brain. There's no particular order. So the heart is more important than the brain or the gut. But there's going to be something worthy of note that I'll make mention to with respect to the heart, which is very, very interesting as well. So the heart's basically responsible for emoting, emotional processing. For example, anger, grief, hatred, joy, happiness, etc. It's also responsible for values. It's responsible for identifying our values, understanding our values, processing what's important to us and our highest priorities, and its relationship to the emotional strength of our aspirations, dreams, desires, purpose, vision for self, etc. Now, what I was mentioning earlier was with this worthy of note, is that the heart is approximately 60 times greater electrically and up to 5,000 times stronger magnetically than the brain. What's also interesting to note is that the heart develops first in the fetus, and it really gives rise and power to the rest of the body. I'll let you think about that. We can't go too deep into it, of course, because we'll run out of time. But it is interesting to think about that. And we'll get to I'm pointing here because this is what the brain does. The cognitive brain thinks, it reasons, it has logic, but we'll talk about that in a moment. The heart also is relationally effective. So the relational effect of the heart is our felt connection with others, feelings of love, feelings of hate, feelings of indifference, compassion, uncaring, liking, disliking. There's that dichotomy that takes place there, how we feel about relationships. So if we get very clear with listening to our heart, understanding the prime functions of the heart, it will truly affect the quality of our relationships. It will truly affect the manner in which we move through life and the manner in which we directly interact with others. But of course, also the way that we directly interact with ourselves. Are we self-compassionate? Are we self-caring? Or are we self-loathing? Do we self-hate? Do we self-love? Do we self-care? Those are the questions we would ask ourselves when connected in that heart space. So how it affects the way we act and interact and behave with others is tremendous, because how we connect to the heart and through the heart understand its function, and then understand how we treat each other and how we treat ourselves will determine how we treat each other. And it stems from this area here, yeah? Very interesting to understand. So let's move to the enteric system, or the gut-brain function, prime functions. It's responsible for our core identity of self. It's a very deep and visceral sense of core self, of the core self. And it determines at the deepest levels what is self versus what is not self. It is responsible for self-preservation, a protection of self, safety, creating boundaries, psycho-emotional, social, physical boundaries, hungers and aversions. So it's very, very deeply connected to the vagus nerve, yeah? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's also responsible for mobilization. So mobility, impulse for action, gutsy courage, the will to take action or to act, fear impulses. It's responsible for that fight, flight, freeze that's then interpreted by the brain, of course, and gives us instructions, or rather gives us coherent instructions as to what to do. Very, very interesting again. We look at the head brain prime functions. We want to ask, what is the head? What is the cognitive brain? And it's that thing between our ears, of course, that the grey matter, the master controller of the nervous system that sits atop of the spine under our skull. Now, that's a very physical definition of what the head brain is, but it is also a very accurate definition at this point in time as far as we understand its prime functioning as well. But it's also, the head brain is responsible for cognitive perception, cognition, general perception, of course, pattern recognition, creativity, etc. We're also looking at thinking. We're also looking at reasoning. We're looking at abstraction. We're looking at analysis, synthesis, metacognition. This is the head brain, what it's responsible for. We also look at the head brain making meaning of life and experiences. Our environment, so viscerally our body interprets our environment, and eventually through layers of understanding. So we have a visceral understanding of our environment. Okay, we then go through a feeling state. We then go through an emotional state. We then develop beliefs around that, which then form our thoughts, of course. Our thoughts form our behaviours form our actions influence our performance in life. And when I say performance, I'm not necessarily referring to athletic performance. I'm referring to performance in how we function in life and the efficacy and the clarity of that performance, yeah? So we're looking at, that's what the cognitive brain does with respect to the metacognition, the analysis and the synthesis of our environment, yeah? And of course, making meaning, so semantic processing. So we're looking at sentence structure, we're looking at verbalization, we're looking at processing, we're looking at creating narratives, stories, understanding the world around us, categorizing, metaphors, etc. So that's the prime function of the head brain. And when we look at what research demonstrates, that what does each brain's highest function entail? We look at the head brain being creativity. That's the research demonstrates that's the highest function of the cognitive brain is creativity. The heart brain, it's compassion. And the enteric brain is courage. So again, we look at that as the highest function, but really what are we saying is that we're saying that it's an integral part of that brain. With that in mind and understanding that in full, what it really means is that when we speak to the enteric brain and we speak to courage, we're also referring to the antithesis. It's responsible for assessing fear in our environment as well. But we've of course already discussed that. But we're looking at the highest function. So again, something to think about, food for thought, part of the pun, is if this is the highest function, creativity, compassion, courage, the 3 C's, if that is the highest function of each brain, we must then act in accordance with what exemplifies and brings out the highest function of those brain states. Something to really ponder and dwell upon, yeah? but dwell upon in a very meaningful, creative, passive way. Don't stress out and become so intense with it that you lose your ability to concentrate and understand passively and quietly within the realm of stillness what the function of these brain states are. So what's crucially important is that these highest expressions are only accessed and activated when a person is in an optimal state of neurological balance. And that's what we're aiming to achieve here. Or what is defined as autonomic coherence. Very important term. Important term because it gives us meaning to what balance and an equilibrated three-brain state is. This is when the person is neither too stressed nor too relaxed, but is in a psychological term called the flow state, which we've spoken to in the past. And in future webinars, I'll probably do a 2 or 3 part series on flow state. But it makes sense that unless someone is in a neurological flow state, their perceptions of any particular issue, any environmental stimulus or situation alongside the subsequent decision-making will be impaired by contrast. So unless we're in a flow state, our decision-making isn't as accurate as it could be. And when we say it would be impaired by contrast, we're talking about optimal state of decision-making compared to non-optimal state. It doesn't mean it's going to be bad or result in death or result in anything ghastly or nasty. It just means that it's going to be suboptimal. So again, why would we want to create a state for ourselves that is suboptimal by nature? It doesn't make sense. It's not ideal. It's not optimal. It's not peak flow state or peak state experiences. So if we look at an example of a leader's autonomic nervous system, if a leader's autonomic nervous system is functioning in an overly sympathetic, e.g. stress state, his or her perception and decision-making typically will default to his or her reactive conditioning. So it becomes very instinctual, very enteric. Conversely, if his or her autonomic nervous system is functioning in an overly parasympathetic, e.g. apathetic or freeze response state, he or she will exhibit an inability or lack of desire to act, or at best make very timid, soft decisions that aren't fully authentic or immersed. They come from fear. Whereas in an optimum state of autonomic balance, leaders, the sovereign leader, is able to bring a higher order consciousness into their decision making. And that, my friends, is so empowering. That, my friends, is the ideal. What an interesting place to be able to do that in fullness, yeah? Powerful, so powerful. But we must understand this first in order to be able to move through this state, in order to be able to act optimally. Now, I mentioned earlier the vagus nerve, the information that relays up, and I want to speak a little bit more to that now. So what connects the three brain states, of course, is the information neural superhighway represented by the vagus nerve, which again, we're still learning so much about. 70 to 80% of nerve relays go up, not down. Think about that. 70 to 80% of nerve relays are traveling up towards this, coming from the gut and the heart. That tells us something deep about the way we process information, understand the way we initially absorb information. Please think about that. That's why when your gut and your heart are already in reaction, it's hard to talk yourself out of it. Because understanding this leads us to the beginning stage of creating cohesion in the body and in the mind. There is something very powerful embedded deep in the wisdom traditions. I'll speak a little bit to the wisdom traditions now. It is more the norm than the exception for wisdom traditions to reference 3 forms of soul. It makes sense because it is 3 different intelligences with 3 totally different functions. In yoga, for example, these 3 intelligences are referred to as the head, heart, and gut. Simple. In Christianity, we commonly hear talk of the body, soul, and spirit. We ignore, we fail to place enough importance on the brains we don't understand, and that becomes a problem. But that's changing. Neuroscience is changing that. Western medicine is even changing that. And we're looking very, very differently now at the way we used to look at the role of the heart and the role of the enteric system. Beyond simply just digesting food or pumping blood through the body, or even understanding the heart at a very simplistic, mundane, yes, there's an electromagnetic impulse that comes from the heart. It's far beyond that now, far beyond that. So how can we fail to understand the heart and gut brain? I mean, it could simply be because the language centers exist in our head brain, and we've placed so much. If you look at the last few hundred years, we've placed in the Renaissance period, we look at the rise of the industrial world, we've placed so much emphasis on this thinking brain because the language centers exist here as well. It's how we primarily communicate. Well, actually, it's not. We primarily communicate through body language, but because our physical senses are so strong, especially our sight and our hearing, we perceive that our language centers are the primary form of our communication, the way we communicate. Actually not. Language doesn't really take place in the heart, in the gut as we know it. Hence, we may fail to articulate the nagging gut instinct because it hasn't got its own voice per se, not in the form of syntax and language. It tells us situations at odds with our sense of safety or identity, but we can't interpret that all the time with great efficacy and clarity. I'll teach you later, I'll speak to you later some of the techniques we can use to develop the three-brain integrative state. We may fail to listen to the heart and throw ourselves into something that we feel deeply wrong about. This clash can create deep stress within us. It can create anxiety and tension within the entirety of the body, within the mind even as well. And we lose that connection to self. We disengage and disconnect from self. Why is it so important to understand and to integrate? Why is it so important to understand the heart-gut cognitive brain connection? And why is it so important to integrate these? Well, again, I've spoken to that in the last 30 minutes or so, but we're going to expand on that now. So sometimes we use one or the other brains to do the function of another. And this can be confusing for the body and it's terribly inefficient, but we do it for a number of reasons, because of social conditioning, because of ignorance or lack of understanding, and lack of clear communication and integration between the three brain states. So emotional eating, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Emotional eating is one example. It's a heart function, not a gut function, but we think it's a gut function. You can't eat your way to emotional satisfaction. That's the thing. Another is forgiveness. How do we at times deal with an issue we can't get past? See, a lot of people think it's a heart-based issue, but it's not. It's a gut-based issue. This is really interesting because so often forgiveness is often needed because something or someone has trespassed our boundaries and offended our safety or our core identity. Now, remember what we said earlier, the enteric brain is responsible for the core identity. It's responsible for safety. It's responsible for threat analysis in our environment. This is a very visceral feeling, a very visceral process, and it comes from the gut. So we begin to understand this confusion there in the way we interpret which brain center is actually doing what. And if we don't understand, if we don't know, we can't connect fully. And if we can't connect fully, we can't get the most out of these brain centers, and we can't move efficiently in a cohesive, integrated, connected manner. When we listen to people who use the words, I can't get past this, it actually means I can't move. That is a gut issue. That's a freeze. I'm frozen. I'm fearful. I'm engaged in processes of survival. Health issues also follow the same pattern and perpetuate if we fail to understand the three brains. So what can we do to put our three brains to better use? Well, there's a heap we can do. We can look at connected morality. We can look at being inclusive in our actions. We can look at creating a broader awareness of self and others and environment. We can look at practicing greater cohesiveness within our actions, within our thoughts, within communication and listening and feeling to our bodies. The benefits of having that integration is less confusion and less stress. It's living truth and being authentic. In other words, we're finding and creating deep meaning and value and fulfillment in life. We become more courageous, and then therefore if we become more courageous, we're exposed to greater experiences, broader, deeper experiences that are again in alignment with our values and our purpose. We become more intuitive by nature. What are the benefits of becoming more intuitive? We simply hit those peak experiences with greater efficacy. We actually engage in experiences that suit us. We protect ourselves from danger, severe danger, psycho-emotional danger, psychosocial danger, physical danger. We develop better decision-making capacity. We become more efficient and more effective in life. We become more inclusive in our gestures, in our actions, in our interactions, in the way we treat people, in the way we behave. And that connected morality that I mentioned earlier is really an extension of the way we treat ourselves. We extend that to others as well, because we have a very clear understanding of what is important in life. So now we want to know, how do we move past not being connected? How do we move past not understanding? How do we move past not really knowing who we are in that connected, cohesive manner? We must reach autonomic balance. In order to facilitate the level of metacognition we require, in order to experience balanced coherence, we must realize and we must understand how the three different brains are working. We need to get them into deep autonomic balance. That's the first key. So one way we can do that, which is really simple, and I've spoken to breathing practices before, is deep diaphragmatic breathing. Just simply at an even rate. So I'll go through the benefits of this, and then I'll give you a very, very simple understanding of some breath work that can help us get more connected. Because a proper breathing affects the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems in such a way that links us and connects us. We can even do this, we can do it inside of a minute, 1-2 minutes, and you're relaxed, you're there. With just breathing, we can achieve autonomic coherence. So the breath I would like you to focus on, and take note of this, people, if you wish, but there's four key focuses. The first number one focus is tempo. That means the timing of your breath. So whether you choose to breathe 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 seconds, inhaling, do the same for the exhale. So the tempos are even for inhale and exhale. The next most important aspect of the breathing to focus on is the smoothness of the breath. So we want to be smooth. You can see there and you can hear there's a smoothness in breath. It's not my timing may be the same, but I'm stepped in my breaths. We have to be smooth. So timing or tempo and smoothness is number one. The next most important point is your focal point, your intuitive, intellectual, visualized focal point. And you want the focal point to be here in that heart center. Main reason why, because there's 60 times and 5,000 times more electric and magnetic activity in this area. That's where we want our focus to be on. And the fourth most important point is large breaths. So sometimes we say deep breaths. What we really mean is large breaths, because we're expanding our lung capacity. We're expanding, getting deep into our diaphragm, and we're getting deep and deep into our breath. So it's a large breath. So they're the four key points for breathing that we want to be looking at. And that alone, that deep diaphragmatic breathing, that can change your life in terms of creating autonomic coherence, and of course cohesion in the body. Because when the nervous system relaxes, it communicates with greater clarity. Think vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is the second largest bundle of nerves or nervous system outside of the CNS, the central nervous system. It plays a very important role in the way we communicate with ourselves internally, yeah? So next is detaching from our stories. We want to detach from the stories that we hold on to so deeply with so much trauma. And these stories hold trauma. Therefore, if we're holding that trauma viscerally, we're experiencing it unconsciously, constantly in layers. And this is about recognizing that it's just a story, it's just a narrative. There are ways to do this quite easily. And there are cognitive behavioral therapies you can engage in. You can engage in simple counseling. You can engage in meditative practices. You can engage in creative visualization. You can move towards understanding your belief systems. So understanding your belief systems which underpin the way we think and the way we behave and the way we act. That's a very powerful place to begin in terms of detaching from our stories. So in my one-on-one programs and in my online programs such as Mastery of Self and Chaos to Clarity, I go into quite deeply into removing limiting beliefs. Firstly, identifying belief systems, then identifying which belief systems are limiting, so to speak, and then moving beyond them and engaging in very specific exercises and processes of query and deep inquisition of self that assist us in removing these belief systems from self at all layers, in all layers, and moving towards a more enlightened, full version of self, yeah? Very, very important. I do apologise if it seems to be pausing a little bit, and the internet connection may be a little bit slow this evening. I'm not too sure what's going on, but I hope that you're getting a very clean view. So following that detachment from our stories, we teach ourselves how to check in and listen to the signals between the heart and the gut. Very, very important. And there is a sequence that makes a difference. So you check in with what your heart really wants and really values, and what your gut wants to say. So separate from the old story of the past, what does your head really think? That internal voice within will often have a different tone, a truer language pattern will emerge, and greater attention to self can take place. So let me really, really elaborate on that before we get to one of the final steps of creating that autonomic coherence and congruency itself, is that what we're really looking for here is intuition. So we're wanting to listen to our bodies, we're connecting to our bodies, we're connecting to what we're feeling and what we're experiencing and what we're understanding. And then from that place, we're saying, okay, let me verify this. Let me understand this deeper. But we need to be able to listen to it, be open to hearing it, be open to feeling it, and then taking action and observing the outcome of that. So there's a high level of observation that takes place here. There's a high level of understanding that takes place in this space. And it really is, it's a series of trial and error. It's a series of careful critical analysis and reflection on the feeling states that we experience, and then on the action that we take, and then on the outcome of that. And it's a process, people. It takes months, weeks, months, years. But with practice comes progression, comes exposure, comes familiarity, comes comfort, comes insight. And the more we do this, the more we connect to these feelings from heart and gut, and then act upon them, because that's the reinforcement right there. That's what gets us better, more coherent, more adept in that area, is taking the action and learning from it, growing from it, expanding from it, understanding it. That there will assist us greatly, deeply, profoundly in building that intuitive connection with the entirety of the body, that three brain state integration. And finally, we go through a congruency phase where we actually create the alignment. So here we're really talking specifically, very specifically to the action. Once they are aligned, we start to experience the emergence of a high level of consciousness as these three neural networks can better express themselves in fullness. Beautiful. And it will show up in compassion from the heart to creativity in the head and courage from the gut. And what that actually means is that we live more in these states. We experience more compassion from the heart. We experience deeper, broader, greater, more often levels of creativity. We're able to look at a situation instead of be stuck and be in fear. We're able to step into our courage and be creative in our problem-solving abilities, but at the same time be deeply empathetic and compassionate to ourselves and to our surroundings. And I think this is one of the most powerful positions to maintain as human beings. Is it not? Is it not such a profound place to be, that we can connect deeply to the three brain states and almost take effortless action in life? Effortless action that allows us to live fully, authentically, properly, in a connected manner. And it's a huge experiment. As I mentioned earlier, Western science, modern science, is discovering and only understanding now what ancient wisdom has known for a great long time. I mentioned the ancient Indians, I mentioned Christianity, I didn't mention the ancient Greeks, Mesopotamia, ancient Egyptians, the Aztecs as well. There's so much rich culture and information around the three brain states and the importance of the gut, the enteric area, the heart, especially the heart, in so many different traditions and cultures, and of course the cognitive brain, but in working coherence. So guys, I'm going to speak to now, I'm going to answer a couple of questions and then we'll wrap up. But that's what we've spoken to this evening, is really an integrative process, is really allow yourself the beginning stages of understanding where the heart, mind, or the heart, head and gut brains rest, and how they communicate, how they integrate, and the why behind all that, and the importance of actually knowing that and really deeply connecting to that. Yeah. So let's go through a couple of questions now. That would be wonderful. We'll go through a couple of questions and we'll go from there. We'll open up a discussion. Yeah. Okay. Question 1. Which is the most important brain and why? Well, that's a fantastic question. So I have a couple of ways to answer that. The first answer for me is neither the head, the gut, or the heart brain has a priority over another. Each has a very different, distinct function that is very important to the development, the full, cohesive, integrated, whole development of us as human beings. So for me, neither has a priority. Now, in the second part to that answer is in each specific situation. Okay, in each specific situation, an area of the body or one of the three brain states will be in greater activity or will require a greater attention, or will require a deeper, to move with deeper intention, because that's what's required. So for example, if we're in grave physical danger, that gut brain is going to be the priority in that instance. But of course, it will pass through the heart, it will pass then into the brain, and the cognitive brain will interpret how we understand what we need to do, what action we need to take. So really you begin to understand that all three brain centers play a very integral role in interpreting our reality and then taking action within the parameters and the dynamic of our reality. That's very important to understand as well. So I hope that answered the question to some extent. Second question, do we use the full capacity of our brains? Well, science demonstrates that with respect to the cognitive brain, science demonstrates that we actually do use 100% of our brain. There's an old myth that we use 10% of our brain. What that really refers to is that the way the brain communicates with itself. So let me just focus on the cognitive brain for a moment. The way the brain communicates with itself is definitely lower than what it could be in terms of right brain, left brain hemisphere communication. Which is greater in women, by the way, because I've forgotten the part of the brain that sits in between the right and the left hemisphere. It's eluded me. My apologies, people. But that part of the brain is actually larger and more active in females than in males. But again, the brain, we work at 100%, but we're not as efficient as we could be because we don't understand our own internal processes, because we're still learning deeply about who we are and how we behave and move and govern ourselves through the world in our environment. So do we use the full capacity of our cognitive brain? Yes, we do. Do we leverage upon it? No, we don't, because we don't understand it as well as we could. Do we use the full capacity of our heart and enteric brains? No, I don't believe we do. Not consciously anyway. So we don't use them consciously, fully and openly. And that can become a problem. But again, in saying that, we are moving as a society, as a collective, and as individuals. We're becoming far more inquisitive. We're becoming far more curious. We're asking deeper questions of self. And that is opening tremendous doors to who we are as human beings. So I can very much appreciate the path that we're on is enveloping, and the path that we're on is definitely evolving as a collective society, but as individuals as well. And the way we're understanding ourselves and relating to each other and ourselves is definitely transmuting, definitely. Next question. Where do you see... Sorry, this question doesn't make sense. One moment. I think I might have to paraphrase. Apologies. Okay. So basically, it's effectively, the question's effectively asking, where do we feel we are going? What is the potential of the human race if an integration of all three brains takes place in a very cohesive manner? That's a big question. That's a fantastic question. My answer is limitless, because we're not quite connected as we could be right now. We're not really connected. I don't like to use the word should be. And if I do use it in this instance, because we're not really exploring our capacity. So when we look at the previous question of do we use the full capacity of our brains, most of the time, no, not in an integrated manner. So when we're talking about full integration in those three brains, we're talking about a very, very evolved state. We're talking about a deeply evolved state of being, a state of being that is more cohesive, more connected, more able, more powerful, more empowered, more understanding, more empathetic, more inclusive, more intellectualized, more intelligent emotionally, viscerally, physically, spiritually, cognitively. We're talking about a human being that is almost what we would consider now superhuman. And we have that capability. We have the hardware for that. Think about that. We possess the hardware for this. It's an exciting time. It's an exciting place to be when we think of life like that, when we think of our capacity and our ability to be. It's tremendous. Last question. Do certain animals have a similar brain integration capacity? That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that fully. I would say some of the more intelligent mammalian species do, and there is research being done in these areas now, and that's really interesting as well. So, I mean, even looking at the primates as well, and looking at apes and monkeys, and it's very, very interesting to see the way they behave in their environment as well, and the evolution of that species too. And even looking at other animals, and there's a lot, the World Wide Web is connected us so deeply and so profoundly that we're able to witness animals in their natural environment reacting and behaving in such humanistic ways that we have to stop ourselves from anthropomorphizing these animals, because there's such a deep connection there. And the way to understand and explain that is that there is a synchronicity and a synergy and an integration that takes place between the three brain states, because of course animals have that. They have a cognitive brain, they have a heart, and they have an enteric system as well. albeit slightly different to us, it still very much exists. So if we can understand that and we become more inclusive in nature, by nature, in that way, I think it will, I truly believe it will evolve us and help us understand ourselves a great deal deeper as well. So yes, to answer the question, I do believe that that is occurring. There is research and, again, science and exploration of that. You just simply need to look a little bit deeper for it. People, I'm going to wrap up then. I'm going to say thank you so much for being present. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening, for watching, for being part of this journey with me. If you believe in these weekly wisdom webinars, if you're getting great information from them, if you're learning, you're growing, you're expanding, share this with your friends, with your loved ones, with those that you care about. If you have any questions during the week, please let me know. We're getting close now. There's only a few more tenets left of the sovereign leadership model. Then we're moving, this is very exciting, we're moving to the authentic self model. And there's 14 tenets in the authentic self model as well. Well, one of them is actually sovereign leadership, because they cross into each other. So there's 13, we'll discuss 13 tenets of the authentic self model. So we've got a number of months ahead of us. It's a deep, great exploration of self and, of course, our reality, our relationships, and it's super exciting time to be alive. People, thank you so much for watching. I very much appreciate it. Many blessings on your journey. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you so much.